Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We have come to an end of this lesson, sizing the project. What does it mean by sizing the project? In determining the size of the re-engineering project, it is actually critical to the success of the re-engineering project. It is very crucial. It is very important to the success of the re-engineering project. It is not just a practical matter. If you still remember what we have learned earlier in chapter 1, re-engineering means the radical change, which, if improperly scoped, it will destroy a vulnerable organization. All right, so to properly size a project, we must address the issues of scope, the issues of boundaries, timing, resources, critical factor, and the root cause analysis. So there are 6 issues that must be addressed to properly size a project. Let's start with the first issue of sizing the project, which is scoping the project. So in defining a project scope, it begins with the identification of those business processes. Those business processes that must be re-engineered to achieve the vision. So here what does it mean by processes? Processes are what the business does. Not who performs for the work. So process is not a task, it's not a business function, nor a department. So a business is what the business does. So typically the business contains 4 to 7 sub-processes. The minimum of 4 or the maximum of 7, depending on the size of the business. And it is important for us to know on how to separate the what, separate what from who, because it is critical in scoping a project. So the process must meet these 5 criteria. First criteria is the process should produce or manipulate data or physical materials. Second criteria is the project, the process should add value to distinctive business outcomes or the work products. It should add value. The third criteria for a process is it can be performed by one or more individuals or teams of people. You can't do it alone. It is a combination of a few efforts. Fourth, a process is triggered by one or more events. It started by one or more events. And the last criteria is it consumes resources. All right, after meeting these 5 criteria of a process, there are 6 rules to define clearly the scope of the project. The first rule is limit the project to no more than 7 and no fewer than 4 interrelated processes. So you have to limit the number of project. All right, the number of processes. Second, scope should not exceed the control or influence of the highest level person sponsoring of the project. So this sponsor has the political power most of the time, to set a standard for the requirements of input to the department. The third rules to define clearly the scope of the project is the process included in scope must relate directly to the vision. So it is very important for us to focus the process itself to the vision, to direct the process to the vision of the organization. Right? So those processes not directly related to the vision should be removed. Fourth rule is to include only those processes that are broken, that is not working. Okay, so if it already performed well, continuous process improvement will just do. Okay, to increase the performance within the current configuration, okay, you don't need the re-engineering part. You don't need to re-engineer those processes. Okay, the fifth rule is all processes included in scope must share inputs and outputs, communicate or update each other, as the processes may operate in isolation. Okay, and the last rule is to the processes included in scope will share a common culture. Okay, unless the process is not related directly to the organization's functions, there's no need to integrate the process into the culture. So these are the 6 rules to define clearly the scope of the project. The second issue to be addressed to properly size a project is setting project boundaries. Okay, with the project scope defined, it becomes easy to identify the organization units responsible for performing the processes and supplying inputs or receiving outputs through the interface. Usually, a matrix diagram will be used to map processes and organization units responsible for the process. So by setting the boundaries, we will be aware of people within the units directly affected by the business reengineering project. And it is now easy to identify and select anyone in the organization, the executives, the managers, the professionals, to be members of the business reengineering project. The third issue is time available to complete the project. Okay? It is related to the duration, the timing of the project to be completed. Okay? So the timing must be extremely realistic, in expecting how long it actually takes to re-engineer a business operation. So basically, for the implementation to complete, it may take several months to several years, depending on several factors. There are 5 factors that we have to look at. And number 1 is number and complexity of business processes. How many interrelated business processes? Okay, earlier we have discussed it should be between 4 to 7 business processes. So it is depending on the number of business processes. The more the business processes, the longer it takes for the implementation. The complexity of the business processes, all right, whether it is easy to change or it is too complex to change. All right. Second, severity of the changes, whether it is a radical changes, but whether the severity, the seriousness of the changes. Yes. The third is number and size of organization directly involved and impacted. Okay. If the size of organization is large, so it involves many employees in the organization as compared to small organization. The fourth is amount and type of new technology applied. So it is depending on the technology that you want to apply, that you want to embed in that new processes. So it will take time if it is a high-end technology, for example. And then resistance of culture to change. This is the longest to change. The culture in the organization, the norm, the beliefs of the employees in the organization. So there are 5 factors that might affect the implementation of the re-engineering. All right. The timing that might affect the timing of that re-engineering. The fourth issue is resources for the project. Okay? There are three resources for any business re-engineering project: financial, facilities and equipment, and human. Okay, so we need these three resources for us to implement the business re-engineering project. We should have the funding. Okay, we should have the facilities and equipment to help us to implement the project, and the most important resources is human, right? So if resources are limited, the re-engineering project should be downsized and controlled very carefully, to have a successful resource management. Common mistakes made by project teams are, first, investments focus on the technology only, rather than on changes to business policies and practices and training. Okay? We may focus on the technology, but it should be balanced on all parts of the changes, especially if you implement a technology, the new technology in the organization, you should provide training to the employees so that they can use that technology. All right. Second mistake is technology development proceeds without clear and definitive specifications of performance for transaction processing and information needs. You need to devote more time on the analysis part and designing activities. Third mistake is human support for implementation is not made available. So human support is very important towards the implementation of the business re-engineering project, to achieve the vision mission of the company. Accountability for training, coordination, problem solving must be assigned to be accountable for these new changes. And the last mistake is measures to monitor progress are not an integral part of the implementation. Periodic and consistent forums for reporting progress, for problem solving must be available during the implementation so that the progress can be measured and correction can be made. The second last issue is project sizing critical factors. A business re-engineering project team should consider these 6 factors in sizing the project and setting re-engineering goals and estimating time frame. First factor in project sizing critical factors is number of business processes. The more the processes included within the scope of the project, the larger the project, and this may take many years to implement. But bear in mind to limit the interrelated processes to only 4 to 7 processes. The second factor in project sizing critical factor is diversity of business processes. The more unlike, the more dissimilar, the more contrast the business processes, the greater the differences in work methods, in practices, in culture, that will increase the project complexity. So this will require more effort to bring a common set of business policies and practices. So we should take a look at the number of interrelated business processes. We should limit the number of interrelated processes because the many the number of business processes it will the more diverse it will be. And then the number of organizational units, it's actually interrelated with each other. When you have many number of business processes in many number of organizational units, as number of organization directly involved that will affect the duration of the project. So if the number of the organization directly involved increase, there is a large number, the greater the number, the longer it will take to get consensus from all decision makers. And number 4, organizational relationships to processes. Okay, the greater the number of the organization units, okay, that perform the business processes, there will be overlapping in terms of the accountabilities, the responsibilities, redundancies of works, okay, and it will make the project more complex. So we need to simplify this overlapping. Number 5, organizational politics. Okay, additional or more time may be required to build trust, reduce hostilities, create true commitment among the management, the top management, middle management, lower level management to the project if the level of politics intense is very high in the organization. So these organizational politics are usually influenced by leaders that only think of their personal interests, without regards to the effect on the organization itself. And the last critical factors in project sizing is risk aversion nature of culture. So if people have not been rewarded for making changes, for thinking strategically, for thinking creatively, resistance will be profound. Executives and managers may exhibit this resistance. They only focus on the short term rather than the long term perspective. Alright, managers tend to favor projects that require small investment over those that require larger investment, even when both alternatives are projected to have positive outcomes related to the size of the investment. Or manager, they tend to consider each business on its own rather than considering the successes and the failures of all the decisions they must make over the period of time. So that are the 6 factors in sizing the project. The last issue is root cause analysis. What is the goal of this root cause? The goal is to look systematically beyond the symptoms of a problem to find its actual cause. So this root cause analysis is very important in business process reengineering to avoid from wrong choice of path. So we need to dig deeper to see what are the root problems, the problems of the processes that we want to change. So most problems are rooted in the product or process complexity, but the symptoms may not appear in the process itself. It may come from the upstream business process. So we need to dig deeper so that we know what are the causes of the problems in existing process.